My wife once told me that living separately could actually save our marriage. It sounded strange, but I tried to stay open minded. That was before her sister started getting close to me. And suddenly, Anne's picture perfect plan fell apart right in front of everyone. I'm a 36-year-old guy, and I need to get this whole wild story off my chest. I've been married to Anne, she's 33, for nearly 8 years now. We've been together a solid decade and have two beautiful daughters, one 7, the other 5. Honestly, I thought we were doing just fine. Sure, we weren't acting like newlyweds anymore, but who does? After 10 years and 2 kids, we had what I thought was a typical functional marriage. Yeah, we'd bicker now and then. Petty stuff, like me leaving my dirty work boots in the living room or her impulse buys on Amazon. But nothing catastrophic. I work in construction management, started from the ground up, and worked my way into a decent paying role. Anne's got a steady corporate gig she seems to enjoy. We bought a house 3 years ago in a good neighborhood. The girls are thriving in school, and we even added a dog to the family last year. From the outside, it looked like we were living that picture-perfect suburban dream. But now, looking back, there were signs. Subtle, maybe, but signs nonetheless. Anne had started acting differently. There was a lightness in her mood, a sudden spark I hadn't seen in a while. She seemed more energized, more upbeat, and oddly enthusiastic about work. That stood out. Normally, she'd just vent about office politics, annoying coworkers, or boring meetings. Just your standard complaints. But recently, her tone had shifted. She started speaking about her job like it was thrilling, like it had purpose. And then there was her boss, Jim. At first, he was just a name she'd casually mention. Jim cracked a hilarious joke during the meeting, or Jim had a brilliant idea that saved the project. It all seemed harmless, like typical workplace chatter, but slowly his name began surfacing more frequently, and with a tone I couldn't ignore. It was in the subtle comments, tiny drops that built a bigger picture in hindsight. We were once chatting about leadership styles when she said, Jim's take on team management is actually really inspiring. That caught my ear. Another time I teased her about corporate lingo and jargon, and she instantly jumped in saying, Jim believes those phrases help build a strong team culture. That didn't sound like Anne. That sounded like Jim talking through her. I remember making a joke, half laughing. Sounds like Jim's your work husband. Just messing around. But she stiffened, just for a second. But it was there. She forced a laugh, then said, Oh, stop, he's just a great mentor. I didn't press it. Just another weird moment. I figured I was reading too much into it. That night, I was half watching a YouTube tutorial on garage door repairs when Anne walked in. She had this expression, nervous, like she'd been rehearsing something in her head for hours and had finally built up the courage to say it. Everything okay? Kids good? Your parents? I asked without looking up, still distracted by the video. She nodded quickly, shifting awkwardly on her feet like she couldn't get comfortable. Yeah, everyone's fine, she said, hesitating. I need to talk to you about something. That made me pause the video. I turned and gave her my full attention. Okay, what's going on? She took a long breath, clearly bracing herself. I think maybe we should try living apart, but still be married. Wait, what? Living apart? Together? She nodded, almost relieved to have gotten the words out. Yeah, it's a thing people do now. We'd still be together, share custody, but live in different places. I blinked, trying to wrap my head around this. Was this some elaborate joke? She looked serious. Completely serious. I even paused to consider if I'd inhaled too many cleaning fumes earlier. This was coming out of nowhere. That morning, everything was normal. We had breakfast as a family. I helped get the girls ready for school, kissed Anne goodbye, It was a regular Tuesday. No fights, no tension, nothing. I asked her to explain more. Where was this idea coming from? Was something wrong between us that I hadn't noticed? That's when she mentioned her new friend from yoga, Pat. Apparently, Pat had become a bit of a guru on modern relationships. Oh, and she's been divorced. 4 times? Yeah, let that sink in. 4. And she somehow sees herself as an authority on successful marriage strategies. If anything, she's a case study in what not to do. Still, I stayed calm. I didn't raise my voice. I wanted to have a real grown-up conversation. I asked Anne straight up, had I done something wrong? Was she unhappy with me? Had she been feeling this way for a while? Her response floored me. She sat there calmly, like we were discussing changing cell phone providers or switching banks. She said she needed space, time for personal growth. She started rattling off all these catchphrases that sounded suspiciously like something she'd copied straight from a blog or one of Pat's healing circles. She told me that living apart together was the future of healthy relationships, that tons of European couples are doing it. Sweden, she said, was leading the trend, as if what works in Stockholm is guaranteed to work in the middle of suburban Ohio. And then came the kicker. She actually had the audacity to say, "We can always move back in together if it doesn't work out," like our marriage was some kind of streaming service trial. Cancel anytime. No commitment necessary. I sat there in stunned silence, thinking about our daughters. How do you explain something like that to a child? Mommy and Daddy still love each other, but we're going to live in different houses now. Don't worry. It's just a modern thing. Yeah, good luck making that sound okay to a 7-year-old. That night, everything began to unravel. Sleep completely escaped me that night. My mind was racing with 1,000 questions, spinning endlessly. Anne had never been someone who entertained unconventional ideas, let alone embraced them. Even when the topic of open marriages came up, usually as a punchline at dinner parties, she'd immediately shut it down with a firm, "Not for me," followed by an eye roll. She used to laugh at couples who tried outlandish modern setups, dismissing them as desperate or naive. So what changed? What made her suddenly decide that living apart together was the answer to our marriage? Had I failed her somehow? Was there something I had overlooked? Something I hadn't been giving her that she needed? I kept rewinding the past few months in my head, scanning for the exact moment things shifted. But the more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that she had seemed genuinely happy, lighter, more energized. There was a spark in her that hadn't been there for a long time, and if I had to trace that transformation, it lined up almost perfectly with the time she got close to her new friend, Pat. From that point on, it felt like I was living with a different version of Anne. Same face, same voice, but something fundamental had changed. So after she dropped the bombshell about wanting to live apart while staying married, I did what any halfway sane husband would do under those circumstances. I spent the entire night doom-scrolling through articles, blogs, and academic studies about living apart together relationships, all while mindlessly devouring leftover Halloween candy from our kids' stash. Twix bars became my emotional support. To my surprise, this LAT concept wasn't complete lunacy. Apparently, some people made it work. But here's the thing. It's mostly folks in their 60s or 70s, long past the parenting stage, or couples separated by jobs in different cities. Definitely not young parents with elementary-age kids living in the same zip code. Red flag number 427, if you're keeping count. But instead of flipping out, I decided to play it smart. You know the saying, give someone enough rope and they'll hang themselves. That was my mindset. So the next morning, over coffee, I sat down with Anne and said, "Okay, let's talk logistics. How would this actually work?" I pulled out my laptop, opened a Google Doc, and started jotting down bullet points like I was prepping for a corporate strategy meeting. The look on her face, priceless. She clearly hadn't expected this level of organization. I think she imagined something way more casual, like a you do your thing, I'll do mine situation, without any real structure or accountability. So, we need to figure out a formal custody schedule, I said, tapping at my keyboard. What do you think? Alternating weeks? Maybe a 2-2-3 split? Her expression morphed into that famous shocked Pikachu meme. I wasn't done. We'll also have to decide on holiday rotations, birthdays, school breaks, Christmas. What's the plan? I added, casually sipping my coffee. And we should probably loop in legal help to draft up agreements. To avoid misunderstandings later. That's when I dropped the kicker. By the way, remember my cousin Kate? She's a family lawyer. She actually offered to represent me pro bono if I ever needed it. Just a random convo from last Christmas party. Drunk Kate was full of wisdom that night. Anne's eyes widened. She suddenly brought up some lawyer she knew through Pat. The same guy who'd apparently handled all 4 of Pat's divorces. I'm not even joking. 4. How is that guy even still practicing? Then I started hammering her with detailed questions. Who's paying for the second apartment? How are we dividing household bills? What about the girls' school drop-offs and pickups? Who's responsible for medical stuff? Emergencies? Extracurriculars? Parent-teacher nights? PTA meetings? I watched her confidence unravel with each question. She kept shifting in her seat, trying to maintain composure, but her plan was clearly falling apart. This wasn't what Pat had sold her. This wasn't some whimsical journey of self-discovery. This was real life, with real logistics and real consequences. And then came the masterpiece, the spreadsheet I'd created at 3 in the morning. I pulled it up and spun my laptop around. It had everything: rent, utilities, groceries, insurance, even a column for dating expenses. Yeah, you read that right. If we were going to pretend this was the future of marriage, I was going to include the whole picture. Anne stared at it, stunned. The numbers spoke louder than I ever could. Reality was setting in. This wasn't going to be some feel-good, independent woman montage from a Netflix rom-com. This was going to be budgeting and shared calendars, and scrambling during flu season. I leaned back and dropped the next question, cool as ice. So what neighborhood are you thinking of moving to? That made her flinch. She hesitated. A few seconds ticked by before she answered. I've been looking at Oak Valley. Now, if you're not familiar, Oak Valley is a high-end apartment complex on the opposite side of town. Swanky, trendy, and overpriced. Not remotely aligned with anything on my spreadsheet. It's also a 30-minute drive from the kids' school, has no playground, and almost all the units are one bedroom. It made no sense, unless she wasn't planning on hosting the kids much, or unless someone else was the real draw. I ended the conversation there and told her we'd continue planning later. But inside, red flags were flaring like sirens. Why Oak Valley? What's so special about that place? So I did what any paranoid but not entirely crazy husband would do. I started digging. And luckily, fate threw me a bone. My coworker Dave has a sister who works at the leasing office at Oak Valley. I texted him a quick favor. Could he get some info on who lived there? Yeah, I know it was sneaky. But desperate times, right? Guess who lives at Oak Valley? None other than Anne's new regional manager, the one she's brought up roughly 600 times in the last couple of months, Mr. Passionate about corporate synergy himself. At first, I thought maybe she just admired his lifestyle. Maybe she envied the neighborhood. But what really set me off? When I brought up the girls' rooms, I asked her if she'd started thinking about how to furnish their spaces in her new apartment. She got cagey. Her whole demeanor shifted. Maybe we should wait until I'm settled in, she said. That, right there, told me everything I needed to know. Anne casually mentioned that the girls might be a little confused at first, but not to worry. Maybe they should just stay with me most of the time until she got settled. That was the line that did it for me. Nothing screams dedicated mother like volunteering to limit your own time with your kids so you can move into a trendy one-bedroom apartment near your totally not a love interest boss. I didn't say anything about Jim right away. I wasn't going to fire off accusations without having my facts straight, so I did what any suspicious husband would do. I reached out to her sister, Liz. Now, Liz and I had always gotten along, maybe a little too well if I'm being completely honest. Ever since her divorce last year, she'd been more friendly. Nothing outright inappropriate, but the flirtation was definitely there. She once said, only half joking, "If my sister hadn't married you first." I laughed it off at the time, chalked it up to the wine and post-divorce loneliness. I never encouraged it because, well, I was married to her sister. When I told Liz about the whole living apart together idea, she was floored. But then her shock started giving way to realization. Apparently, Anne had been dropping odd questions in casual conversation for weeks. Things like, "How long do you think someone should wait to start dating after separating?" Or, "Would it be weird to date someone from work?" And then the gem, "What's the best way to tell the kids you're seeing someone new?" Liz didn't think much of it at the time. But now the puzzle pieces were clicking into place. And then she hit me with the kicker. Anne had been asking specific questions about Jim. What floor did he live on? Was he seeing anyone? Did he ever talk about his weekends? It was everything short of asking for his medical history and bank account number. She thought she was being discreet, but Liz picked up on the pattern. I felt sick to my stomach. All those years, together, the life we'd built, and she was just maneuvering, positioning herself for a transition, if it was some calculated move in a board game. Like our marriage was a broken app, she could just uninstall and replace it with a newer version after reading a couple of inspirational quotes online. I spent that entire night in the garage. The lights were off. I told myself I was fixing up some old shelves, but the truth is, I was using the punching bag I kept in the corner for stress. My fists were raw, my knuckles aching. I clenched my jaw so hard it felt like my molars would crack. Every time I thought about the way she'd sat across from me, calmly suggesting a total rewrite of our lives, I saw red. Meanwhile, Anne was inside, on the phone with Pat for 2 straight hours, probably receiving more expert advice from the 4-time divorce champion. I could imagine the two of them laughing, mapping out how best to dismantle our marriage while painting it as a progressive move. I knew then that whatever bond we had left was shattered, but I wasn't going to let it end on her terms. If this was going to fall apart, it would be with me in control of my own dignity. The next morning, I started searching for apartments, not near our current place, but near Liz's neighborhood, way on the other side of town, the complete opposite direction from Oak Valley. Later that day, I brought it up while scrolling on my phone. Anne was across the table, sipping her coffee, pretending like everything was normal. "I started checking out apartments," I said casually. She didn't even look up. "Oh? Where?" I glanced at her, expression neutral. "A few places near Liz's area." That got her attention. Her head whipped up, eyes narrowing. "Wait, that's nowhere near Oak Valley." "Nope," I said, taking a slow sip of my coffee. She frowned. "That's not fair to the girls. It's too far. It'll make everything harder for them." I set my mug down and looked her dead in the eye. "Oh, now we're concerned about what's fair for the kids." She blinked. "Didn't expect that." The woman who wanted to live 30 minutes away in a one-bedroom and reset her life suddenly remembered the importance of logistics and co-parenting. The hypocrisy was suffocating. She tried to recover, letting out an annoyed sigh. "That's not what I meant. You're just being difficult." I leaned back, laughing bitterly. "No, Anne, I'm enjoying this. A lot." Her eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't answer. I just got up and walked out. Let her stew. And just when I thought she couldn't possibly make me more furious, she found a way. That evening, I happened to walk past the bedroom and heard her talking on the phone again. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but her voice carried, and what I heard made my blood run cold. "Yeah, I think it'll be good for us," she was saying, cheerful as ever. "It'll give me a chance to reset, focus on myself, you know? And honestly, I think Tom will come around. Once he sees how much easier it is this way, less stress, less arguing, he might even end up preferring it." She laughed. She actually laughed. Like our marriage was a failed software update and she'd just discovered the patch. I stood there, frozen, fists clenched so hard my nails dug into my palms. She really thought I'd just accept this, roll over like some clueless fool who couldn't see the chessboard. That's when I knew it was time to hit her where it hurt, but in a way she never saw coming. The next day we were sitting in the kitchen, going over more of this modern, mature separation, and she was acting all self-satisfied, like we were some enlightened couple leading the charge into the future of marriage. That's when I dropped the bomb. "Oh, by the way," I said, casually sipping my coffee, "need your opinion on something. Should I cancel the Florida tickets or just change the names?" She blinked. "What Florida tickets?" I could see her trying hard to sound unaffected, but the way her voice pitched upward gave her away. Her head snapped up so fast I thought she'd sprain her neck. "That surprise vacation I booked," I said, playing it cool. "You remember? You're always posting about Florida. Thought it'd be a nice gesture. Just hadn't told you yet. Figured I'd wait for the right moment." Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked like she was trying to do math without a calculator. All that obsession with Florida, her Pinterest boards, the saved posts, the dream photos, and I just dropped the realization that it wasn't going to be hers anymore, and that was just the beginning. I had planned the Florida trip as a surprise for our upcoming anniversary. 7 full days at a beachfront resort, ocean views, gourmet dinners, the whole romantic package. I'd even arranged for Anne's parents to take care of the girls during our getaway. They didn't know anything about this living apart together situation, yet another impending disaster waiting to unfold. When I told her about the trip, the look on her face was priceless. First, there was excitement, then confusion, and finally this bizarre mixture of hope and panic. It was like watching a kid who just got told they're going to Disney World, only to remember they're grounded. "You planned a Florida trip for us?" she whispered, her voice fragile, almost hopeful. "Yeah," I said, keeping my tone calm. "I planned it for us, when we were still an us. But now, since you're going ahead with this living apart idea, I figured maybe you'd want to take someone else instead. The tickets are paid for. They're non-refundable. It would be a shame to waste them." That hit her like a truck. She immediately started backpedaling, flailing emotionally like someone slipping on ice. "Maybe we should hold off on this living apart thing," she said. "We could use this trip to reconnect, you know, work on things." I shook my head slowly. "Actually, I already called the travel agent. Had your ticket changed to be transferable? You can take whoever you want." I let that hang in the air for a beat before dropping the next bomb. "Maybe Jim would enjoy a beach vacation." Her face lost all color. It was like someone had pulled the plug on her. She went pale as a sheet, stammering, trying to recover. "Jim? He's just a coworker. Why would you even say that?" I shrugged as casually as I could. "Well, since you're looking to move into the same apartment complex as him, I just figured you two must be close." Then I got up and went to refill my coffee like I hadn't just detonated a grenade in the middle of our kitchen. She followed me, flustered, trying to explain that I'd misunderstood everything, that Oak Valley was just a convenient location, that Jim was living there was a pure coincidence. Then she asked the question that gave her away completely. How do you even know Jim lives there? Have you been checking up on me? I looked her straight in the eye and said, Funny. You seem more worried about how I found out where Jim lives than about the fact that you were planning to move in next door to him without telling me. She didn't say a word after that. Just stood there, eyes glistening, lips trembling. I thought she was going to cry right there, but instead, she stormed off like a teenager caught sneaking out past curfew. After all that, I held on to a sliver of hope. I thought maybe the confrontation would force her to come clean, to be honest, to finally own up to what was really going on. I was wrong. Instead, she went into full-blown damage control mode, but not the kind where you apologize and try to fix things. No. Anne went the other route. The gaslight everyone into thinking you're the real victim strategy. She ran straight to Pat, of course. That woman must have a loyalty card for failed relationships. I heard Anne sobbing through the walls during their 3-hour phone call, crying about how I was emotionally manipulating her by, get this, confronting her with her own plan to ditch her kids and shack up near her boss. The mental gymnastics those two perform could qualify them for Olympic gold. And then came another twist. Remember my work buddy Dave? The one whose sister works the front desk at Oak Valley? Well, turns out our dear Jim has been playing his own shady game. According to the always reliable office gossip, thank God for nosy receptionists, Jim's been telling people in the break room about some hot single mom from accounting who's really into him. Guess who works in accounting? It gets better. Jim has a girlfriend. A serious one, as in picking out rings and looking at venues. Serious. And she has no clue about any of this. Dave's sister confirmed they're living together at Oak Valley. She processed their lease renewal last month. So here I am, sitting on a mountain of explosive information. One part of me wants to go full scorched earth. Tell Jim's girlfriend, tell HR, tell every living soul. But the other part of me, the smarter part, which suspiciously sounds like Cousin Kate the lawyer, says, be patient. Keep gathering evidence. Don't play your hand too early. Speaking of Kate, she came through in a big way. She worked some legal magic and got her hands on Anne's Oak Valley rental application. And guess what? Anne listed herself as single. Not separated, not married, single. Even better, for her emergency contact, she didn't put me, not the father of her kids, not her own parents. Nope. She put Jim. Meanwhile, Anne's been trying to keep her fantasy world intact, talking to me about possibly saving our marriage one minute while texting Jim the next. Yeah, I saw the messages pop up on her iPad. She still hasn't changed the passcode from our wedding anniversary. Rookie move. Watching her juggle these lies is like watching a toddler try to carry water in a spaghetti strainer. And then there's Liz. Ever since the Florida ticket drama, Liz has been checking in on me more frequently. Just being kind, nothing sketchy, supportive texts. Hope you're hanging in there. Let me know if you need to talk. That kind of stuff. One evening, while I was cooking dinner, a text from Liz popped up on my screen. Anne saw it. All hell broke loose. Why is my sister texting you? She snapped. Because, unlike some people, she actually cares about her family, I replied. And she's always had a soft spot for me. That made her seethe. I bet you two are loving this, she hissed. I raised an eyebrow. Interesting how you're more upset about a few texts from your sister than you are about Jim's girlfriend finding out you're planning to move in next door. Jim has nothing to do with this, she shouted. And what girlfriend? She lost it. Full meltdown. Pacing the kitchen, tugging at her hair, mumbling things like, this wasn't supposed to happen like this. No, Anne, it wasn't supposed to happen like this at all. Anne just collapsed, right there on the kitchen floor. One minute she was trying to argue, the next, she slid down against the cabinet like the weight of it all had finally broken her. Sobbing uncontrollably, she choked out between breaths, "You're going to leave me for Liz, aren't you?" She looked up at me, tears cutting through her mascara, leaving streaks down her face. "That's why you're moving near her, right? You and Liz? You probably planned this whole thing together." I just stood there for a moment. I looked down at her and thought about how, not too long ago, everything felt fine. Not perfect, but solid. A partnership, a family. And now here she was, crumpled, desperate, paranoid. She had broken it all. "You know what's funny?" I finally said, leaning against the counter, trying to hold back the fury. "You're sitting here sobbing about the possibility of me leaving you for your sister, which isn't happening, by the way, while you were literally planning to move into the same apartment complex as your married boss. The mental gymnastics you're doing are gold medal level." She looked up at me with a look of shock, like I had blindsided her with the truth she couldn't deny. "It wasn't like that," she sniffled. I just felt stuck, like life was passing me by. And Jim, he made me feel—" I raised my hand. "Let me stop you right there. If the next words out of your mouth are about how your boss, who is in a committed relationship, made you feel seen or special while I was out here working, supporting this family, raising our kids, then don't even finish the sentence. I'm barely hanging on as it is." That triggered another round of sobbing. She folded into herself. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered. "Or the girls. Oh my God, the girls. What have I done?" "That's the thing," I said, my voice tight. "You did mean to hurt us. Maybe not with the intent to destroy, but you made choices. The living apart together plan, the Oak Valley apartment, listing Jim as your emergency contact, claiming you were single on your rental app. All of those were conscious decisions, Anne. You knew those would affect us, and you did it anyway." She just sat there crying, but it didn't bring me any relief, no sense of vindication, just this heavy, hollow sadness. Sad for what we had, sad for our daughters, sad that this was how our love story ended. Not with a blowout, not with betrayal in the traditional sense, but with years of effort slowly being dismantled for a fantasy. Then she said something so absurd I actually laughed. "But Pat said this was normal," she sobbed. "She said all marriages go through this, that living apart together would save our relationship." "Pat?" I asked. "You mean the woman who's been divorced 4 times? That Pat?" She looked down ashamed. "Yeah, that Pat." "Great source of marriage advice," I muttered, the sarcasm sharp enough to cut steel. "I'm so stupid," she murmured, barely above a whisper. "No," I sighed. "You're not stupid, Anne. You're selfish, and there's a big difference." Then she looked up at me, eyes wide, filled with panic and desperation. "Can we fix this, please? I'll do anything. I'll quit my job, cut off Pat, go to therapy. Just, please, don't leave me for Liz." And that's when I realized she still didn't get it. She still thought this was about other people. And Liz, her and Jim. She didn't understand that she had broken something fundamental the moment she started building a separate life, one that didn't include me or our children. "I'm going to stay at Liz's tonight," I said, grabbing my truck keys. "Not because anything is happening between us, but because I need space. Space to figure out how we're going to end this. Because looking at you right now, it just hurts too much." She didn't try to stop me, just stayed on the floor crying while I walked out. I stayed with Liz for 3 days. Spare room, the door closed. No drama, just space. I needed time to clear my head and prepare. Cousin Kate, our family lawyer, was helping me gather everything. We agreed the time had come for full transparency. Everyone needed to know, especially Anne's parents. They deserved to understand why their grandchildren's lives were about to change. We scheduled the family meeting at her parents' house. Neutral territory, familiar, comforting. Her mom even made her signature cookies and brewed a big pot of coffee, like it was just another family get-together, not the implosion of their daughter's marriage. Anne tried to get out of it, said she wasn't emotionally prepared. I told her calmly but firmly that she could come voluntarily, or Kate would begin divorce proceedings without her input. That got her moving. When she walked in, it was surreal. Her mom gave her a tired smile. Her dad didn't even make eye contact. Kate came prepared, meticulously organized, and completely unshaken. She had everything. A printed copy of Anne's Oak Valley rental application, where she'd marked herself single. Text conversations with Jim taken from the synced iPad, and bank transfers to a secret account. She laid it all out like an emotional autopsy. Anne's mom broke first. When she saw single on the application, her face crumpled and the tears started silently. Her dad didn't cry, but the look of betrayal and disappointment in his eyes said everything. He just stared at the table, barely blinking, as Kate continued her detailed explanation. Then we got to the custody agreement. "I want joint custody," Anne said quietly. Her dad scoffed. Not just a laugh, but a bitter, hollow sound I'd never heard from him before. "Joint custody?" he said. "After you tried to move into a one-bedroom apartment and listed your boss, not the father of your children, as your emergency contact?" Anne opened her mouth to respond, but her mom cut her off. "I wasn't thinking clearly," Anne mumbled. "If you say Pat one more time—" Her mom suddenly barked, louder than I'd ever heard her speak. "I swear to God, Anne, don't you dare." That's when Kate stepped in again, calm and professional. Given the documentation of Anne's attempted separation, the prioritization of a relationship outside the marriage, and her unstable planning for the children, we will be pushing for primary custody with Tom. Supervised visitation for Anne until counseling is completed and she can demonstrate consistent, responsible behavior. Anne's face fell like someone pulled the floor out from under her. Reality was finally crashing into the fantasy world she had built. Her dad turned to me, finally speaking with that quiet strength he always had. "The girls, do they know?" "Not yet," I said. "But soon they would. I told everyone I wanted to handle this part myself." The girls were with my parents that day, safe, loved, and completely unaware that their world was changing in ways they couldn't yet understand. Once Anne's confession and breakdown were behind us, it was time to face the logistics. Cousin Kate had drawn up a separation agreement that was more than fair. I would keep the house. The mortgage was solely in my name anyway. Anne would temporarily move in with her parents, which seemed fitting given the circumstances. We settled on a standard custody plan with one caveat. Anne needed to complete therapy before she could resume unsupervised visitation. I even included a clause: no overnight guests of the opposite sex during visitation periods. Yeah, that clause was specifically aimed at Jim, whether she admitted it or not. Anne tried to push back on some of the terms, but her own parents shut her down before she got very far. Her dad said it best: "You lost the right to negotiate when you tried to abandon your children for a man who's about to get engaged to someone else." Watching her own parents take my side over hers, it wasn't satisfying. It wasn't some victorious high. It was just tragic. A visual reminder of how far she drifted from the person they raised. The meeting ended with Anne signing the agreement through tears. Her mother hugged me before I left and whispered, "I'm so sorry." Her father didn't say a word, just nodded with a heavy heart and distant eyes. When I got home that evening, the house felt like a museum. Still, silent. The girls were still with my parents, and without their laughter echoing through the halls, the space felt hollow. On the kitchen counter, I found a note, pages and pages, a handwritten plea from Anne, full of apologies, regret, and desperation. She begged me to reconsider, said she'd change. She'd do anything. But I didn't feel moved. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt nothing. It's been 2 months since that day. The divorce is finalized. Anne is living with her parents, and the girls, they're adjusting better than I could have imagined. Kids are resilient, especially when they can sense who's really in their corner. It's amazing how clear things become when you're not trying to protect someone else's illusion anymore. Now, as for Jim, his world crumbled in spectacular fashion. Remember his girlfriend? The one Anne swore wasn't in the picture? Well, she found out. Apparently, I wasn't the only one keeping tabs on an iPad. She discovered everything, texts, plans, the whole apartment fiasco, and she showed up at Anne's office with printed copies of every single message. And she didn't go quietly. The confrontation went down in front of the entire office. HR got involved. Anne tried to deny it, tried to deflect, but there was no escaping it. Within a week, both she and Jim were terminated for violating company conduct policies. Karma doesn't knock. It breaks the door down. Even Pat, yes, that Pat, got her comeuppance. Turns out Anne wasn't the only wife she'd been whispering modern relationship tips to. At least 3 other husbands from that yoga class came forward, all saying Pat had helped push their marriages off a cliff with talk of emotional liberation and independent intimacy. Her ex-husbands, plural, had a field day online. Last I heard, Pat had moved to Florida. Ironic, really. Off to find herself, I assume. Speaking of Florida, remember those tickets Anne was so worked up about? The ones she thought I'd use to run off with Liz? Well, turns out she wasn't entirely wrong to be worried. She was just wrong about the timing. After the dust settled and the divorce was official, Liz and I started spending more time together. At first, it was all about the girls. They've always adored their aunt. Having her around helped smooth the transition. From there, it turned into coffee chats about Anne's latest drama. Then, late dinners, where we vented about how ridiculous adult dating was. You can probably guess where this went. One night, after we'd tucked the girls in and sat out on the back porch with drinks in hand, we got to talking about the Florida tickets. Liz joked about how Anne used to think there was something between us all along. We laughed. And then, we didn't. Sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of humor. So, yeah, we're dating now. No, it wasn't planned. Yes, we know it's unconventional. But after watching Anne sabotage everything for some married man who never even wanted her, it was kind of grounding to realize I had real feelings for someone who already loved my kids and genuinely understood what it means to show up. When Anne found out, it was DEFCON 1. She went ballistic, called her parents, screaming betrayal. They hung up on her. I guess they remembered how ready she was to walk away from her children. She even tried to use it in court to alter the custody agreement, claimed it was unethical and confusing for the kids. Kate shut it down in 5 minutes flat. Dating your ex-wife's sister isn't the same as planning to move in with your married boss while declaring yourself single, she told the judge. End of discussion. And the custody arrangement? It's working great. I've got full primary custody. Anne gets supervised visits, thanks in large part to the mountain of evidence proving she prioritized her fantasy life over her responsibilities. She's attending real therapy now. Not Pat's wine and wine sessions, but that's not my burden to carry anymore. The girls are thriving. Really thriving. Turns out, having their aunt around all the time doesn't feel weird to them. They just think it's awesome. Liz helps with homework, comes to every school event, and, most importantly, has never once suggested moving away for some personal transformation. And that college fund Anne tried to dip into to pay her Oak Valley deposit? Her parents intercepted it, transferred it into a secured account under my management for the girl's actual future. They barely speak to Anne now, but they're at my place every Sunday for dinner. Me, Liz, the girls, and two grandparents who've learned to find peace in new beginnings. They're adjusting to the new normal, and honestly, I think they're just happy their grandkids are safe, stable, and smiling again. Life's funny like that. A year ago, I thought my world was ending when Anne first brought up this living apart together nonsense. Now, I've got full custody of my kids, a job I love, a business that's booming. And somehow I ended up with someone who had been there the whole time, someone who watched me try, really try, to be a good dad and husband while her sister threw it all away. Someone who never needed to be convinced of my worth. And Anne? She still tries, occasionally, to claw her way back, to manipulate, to frame herself as the victim. But none of that matters anymore, because I finally see everything clearly. She left a tearful voicemail, going on about how much she's changed, how she finally understands what she lost. I didn't even bother responding. I just forwarded it to Kate to add to the custody file. Then I took Liz and the girls out for ice cream. The irony? Anne was once so paranoid about me and Liz, terrified we'd end up together. And now, she's the reason it happened. Honestly, sometimes the trash really does take itself out. Chef's kiss.